Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. Just wanted to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy workday to join us for this webinar sponsored by the Master of Digital Product Management program here at Queen's University, all around the topic of making the transition from technology into product management. It should be a fascinating discussion. We're really looking forward to delivering this webinar to you all today. We'd like to begin by establishing or acknowledging the fact that Queen's University is situated on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. We are very grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. My name is Connor McCann, and I'm the Associate Director of the MDPM program here at Queen's University. I'm joined in the business school boardroom by Valerie Hoover, who's the program manager, who's going to be listening in on today's presentation as well. And I'll soon introduce Dr. Nicholas Graham, who will be moderating and leading today's webinar discussion. But first, I just wanted to provide an overview of the agenda that we'll be working our way through over the next hour or so here. Nick's going to begin with a discussion of what digital product management is really all about before getting into a panel discussion with a number of panelists who are joining us externally today to discuss how they have successfully managed that transition from technology into product in their own careers. And then we're going to open up to a bit of an audience Q&A before wrapping up, hopefully around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here. A couple matters of housekeeping. As I mentioned, there will be a section of today's presentation dedicated to an audience Q&A. So as you think of your questions over the duration of the presentation, please type them into the Q&A function that's housed directly within the Zoom window. You can type your question in. We might be able to address some of those questions in a written format over the duration of the presentation, and we can also build out a list of questions to address verbally with the panel at the end of today's discussion. So please write those questions in as you think of them. Elizabeth McKittrick is providing our back-end Zoom support today, so shout out and thank you to Liz for providing that support. Liz will ensure that everyone who registered for today's webinar receives a video recording of the conversation in their email inboxes, likely within a day or two of the completion of the webinar. So if you're on the call with us now, but you're not able to stay right through to the very end, that's no problem whatsoever, because Liz will ensure that you all receive that recording. So while today's discussion and webinar is really going to be around the topic of making a transition into product management from a technical background, the MDPM program also runs a series of monthly general information session webinars where it's just all about understanding the program, the ins and outs of it when it comes to curriculum design, program delivery, admission requirements, application process. Pretty comprehensive webinars that we conduct on a monthly basis, involving myself as the associate director, Valerie Hoover, and the program manager, again, who's joining me today to sit in on this webinar. Dr. Catherine Broman usually jumps into those general information session webinars as the director of the program, as does our dedicated application advisor, Beth McKellum. So if you're interested by the dialogue today and you think you might want to learn more about the MDPM program, these general information session webinars are a great opportunity to do so. So we would encourage you all to register for the next info session that's scheduled for next month, Monday, February 5th, again, over the lunch hour from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I just wanted to plug that at the onset of today's discussion webinar. So at this point, I would like to formally introduce Dr. Nicholas Graham. Nick is a professor of computing science at Queen's University, specializing in human-computer interaction, game design, and accessible computing. His research focuses on the development of exercise video games that provide physical activity and social interaction to children with neurodevelopmental disorders. Nick's work is highly multidisciplinary and involves recent collaborations with medical doctors, kinesiologists, historians, geologists, and teachers. So Nick will soon moderate a discussion with panelists who have all successfully navigated that transition from technology into product from a professional context. And I think Nick would agree that he has similarly experienced a tech to product transition over the past couple of years in collaborating with faculty from across the Smith School of Business and Queen's School of Computing and integrating academic content across both of those domains to develop the curriculum for the MDPM program. So through this cross-functional collaboration, Nick has truly come to believe that computing forms the glue that brings diverse stakeholders together to create a compelling, viable, and successful digital product. So with that, it's a pleasure to introduce you all to Dr. Nicholas Graham, who will be leading us from here.
Thank you very much, Connor. So before we get to the panelists, I just want to give a little bit of an intro to kind of set the stage. And for students who graduate in science, such as computer science, electrical and computer engineering, biochemistry, mechanical engineering, these sorts of students have a breadth of exciting possible career paths available to them that relate to the technical side of product development. People can follow careers in things as varied as software development, quality assurance, requirements engineering, interaction design, and many, many others. And many people are very happy to take that route and to continue working in the technical stream throughout their careers. There's a lot of reasons to do so. There are always new and exciting technologies to be looking at. That's the one great thing about working in the technical field. New application areas that emerge and they want to learn about and apply. And it's possible to progress within the technical stream towards technical leadership roles, such as being a team lead or a software architect or a senior software engineer. But on the other hand, a lot of people also discover as they move through their career that they want to leverage the technical skills they have and move into leadership roles around the product itself, rather than solely focus on developing the product. And so these roles could include, and this is really our focus today, becoming a product manager, which is the person responsible for the design and bringing to market of the product as a whole. And making this kind of career transition, this kind of pivot, can be challenging. It can require new skill sets. It can require you to learn about different parts of the organization that as a developer, you don't really have to interact with. It can require adopting new ways of thinking about the product that's being developed, a product-centric or product-focused kind of thinking. So if this describes your interests, then today's panel discussion will be interesting, as we're going to be talking with three people who have made exactly this transition in their own careers. But first, let's consider what it means to move into a management role around the products that are being developed by your organization, be it a startup or an NGO or a corporation. And so this is a fascinating kind of position that brings skills in from business, from technical backgrounds, and adds in a good dose of understanding human psychology, that all of these are really things that you need to be able to move into this product management role. And this is a role that's critical to the success of the product. If you don't have a product manager, then there's a very large chance that you will be one of these 78% of organizations that we've cited here, where their technology investments fail to achieve expected results. And we can see how this role can build on a background in business and also on a technical background. So what does being a digital product manager entail? So first of all, you need to be able to thoroughly understand what the problem is that the product is trying to solve, what it is that the eventual product's users need to do, and who these users actually are, as well as the needs and context of the organization in which the product is going to be deployed, and managing the process of designing the product so that it actually meets these needs while being pleasurable and easy to use, while considering if the product can actually be created with the available resources and budget and technologies that are available to your organization. And whether there are ethical considerations, for example, around privacy or accessibility, that need to be considered in the product's design. And working at how the product will be marketed and guiding its technical development, and thinking about how to manage the product post-launch, so as it's trying to grow into being a larger, more dominant position. And operational issues, such as managing the product's release to users and evolution over time. So these are all a lot of different areas, a lot of different balls that a product manager has to be able to keep in the air. So how do we get there? If we've started with, say, a computer science or computer engineering degree, or one in the sciences or other engineering disciplines, how do we make that transition from that technological background to product management? There are a lot of advantages to having a technical background. It gives a thorough understanding of what's required to actually build a digital product, to understand where the challenges are going to be and what resources are going to be required. But often there are also gaps in people's background. For example, how do you avoid prematurely committing to a product idea before all the necessary research has been done to understand what the problem is and who the problem is serving? Or allowing technology to drive design rather than the user and organizational needs, or understanding where the product fits in the marketplace. And so this really means that we have to be able to, as we move from technology to product roles, we have to be able to change our focus from how we build things to also needing to think of what we want to build and why we want to build it. So with this, I'd like to introduce our panel today. Who will help us introduce this question of how a technical person can make the transition into product management. And so Jessica Creces is the Vice President, Strategic Growth and Data at Cineplex Digital Media. She's also chair of the advisory board of Queen's Master of Digital Product Management program. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Western University and a Master of Science in Technology Management from Wilfrid Laurier. And she's worked in management roles at BlackBerry, D2L, Christie Digital, and now Cineplex. Nick Lee is a co-founder and CTO of FlipGive and a member of the MDPM advisory board. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, also from Western, and he started his career as a web analyst at IBM, and since then has worked in analysis and management roles at Onyx, Blast Radius, NJWL, and Better the World. And Rebecca Zhou is a UI and UX designer at OpenLane in Toronto. She holds a Bachelor of Applied Science in Computer Engineering from the University of Waterloo and has worked as a developer at D2L and in design and product management roles at Pixley, Syspot, and Anecdote. And she's currently a student in the Queen's MDPM program. So I think this will give us a pretty wide variety of perspectives of all of these people who've made this transition from a technological background into a product-focused role in their organizations. So Connor, can I end the show now to bring the panelists on? Is that what we should do?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can just drop the screen share there, Nick.
Great, okay. So let me start with my first question to the panel, which is, you all started with a technical education in computer science or computer engineering, and then have moved on to more product-oriented roles. Could you describe how you got your start and what made you want to move into a more product-oriented direction? And maybe Jessica, we could start with you.
Sure. So I kind of fell into computer science a little bit by accident and always was a little more business minded in the way that I worked. So I think for me, it was always asking the question, why? Why were we building this technology? Why were we developing what we were developing? Why do we need this technology? And so that really kind of led me to the path of understanding that this role of product management existed. Quite frankly, when I was navigating the work world in the beginnings, I didn't even know that product management was a thing or a practice. And then I was also told by peers that I was good at explaining the technology and the complexities of the technology in a sort of simpler term. So that was something that I guess I kind of figured out on my own how to do, and was encouraged by a colleague when I was in my first role at RBC to explore the product management field, because I could kind of connect that customer thinking with the technology. So I kind of fell into it by accident, if you will.
Thank you. And Nick Lee?
Yeah, I think very similar to some of the things that Jessica was saying. I started my career early on in sort of like the .com sort of craze where there was a lot of website and application development happening. And back then, the roles weren't so well defined. You had like more developers, which were very obvious, but then you had more the traditional project managers. And I think what I saw specifically, that there was an enormous gap in the requirements analysis area, where you have account managers and project managers that were like, okay, we need to get this done by this date, but they had no idea how to translate sort of the customer requirements or sort of the business needs into what the developers could actually build. And so for folks that like myself, that, just had an acumen for, sitting in a room with all these people trying to translate their languages to each other, it was really about trying to, find and fit the needs of the business back to something that's tangible that we could deliver. And so, back then, being a full stack developer, I really enjoyed the front end work. And I find a lot of the front end technologies around design really help bridge that gap between sort of like, this is what the customer is asking for. This is what we can actually build and deliver. And so that's how I really got into more requirements analysis, like, business system analysis type of work that really started to help me understand, it evolved towards a sort of product management role, which over time, as I started getting more and more involved with startups and the startup community, started to recognize that this was like a burgeoning sort of new field that really needed, very talented folks with multidisciplinary skills to be able to bridge that gap properly.
And Rebecca.
So for me, I think it was more just from the co-op experiences. Waterloo offers 6 co-op opportunities. So for me, it's 6 times for me to screw up before I need to actually do something. So I think I started with like development, front end, I did full stack, even testing. So I never really fell in love with any of those. I think front end was the least hated ones. But I think at D2L, my mentor was very helpful. He started as a product manager and then he moved towards more of a development role that he kind of led me to like UI UX design, user-centered thinking, and he was really helping me translating technical requirements into business needs. And I think that got me interested into the whole world of like UI UX design plus product management. And I think for my last term there, while I was studying, I got the chance to work as a PM, as a contractor. That was very helpful. And that's how I knew like, oh, that's something I really want to focus on. So for me, I think it was just always taking the initiative to look for the next opportunity when you realize this is not something you want. So definitely that was my start.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think a lot of similar themes of beginning to realize even what was out there and then finding the ability to identify areas where there was a gap in your organization and being able to move in and be the person to fill in that gap. And I think, as you're pointing out, there are often gaps that the people in the organization don't even realize are there. And so you took your opportunity by identifying them. And so for people who are thinking about making this transition, what are the particular challenges in your current role that perhaps your education did not prepare you for, the things that people might think ahead to? Maybe we'll start with Nick this time.
Sure. I think moving into product management and like one of the areas that was vastly underprepared for, I would say would be the knowledge around like user market research, as well as like sort of especially in the startup world, the marketing growth practice methodologies that you need to have in place. As a developer, your focus is like, here's the requirements, let's build this out to spec. And, you really have to change that mindset to be like, should I even build this in the first place? And going back to Jess's sort of comment on why. And that requires a real mind shift sometimes to realize that, sometimes the best answer for a certain problem is not to do anything at all. And so, building a repertoire where you know how to be able to go and interview customers properly, get feedback, you're unbiased in sort of the research that you're doing. And moreover, especially if you're in sort of a growth capacity, having that sort of marketing discipline and background is very useful. So things like understanding funnel optimization, being able to conduct the A/B experiment to determine results, to basically test the very hypotheses that you come up in your user research in order to determine whether this product or feature should be fully built out afterwards. It was an area that I really did not have, wasn't fully unprepared for. And it's something that I actually had to go through like a startup growth camp, so to speak, to learn a lot of those practices and be able to use them in my day-to-day job now.
And Jessica, you're nodding heavily. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a similar path to what Nick experienced there. Just to tell a little bit of a story, when I came to Cineplex Digital Media, there was no product team. at all. There was a development team, and they spoke directly to sales, and sales told them exactly what they needed to build for the customer. And whether or not you wanted to sort of believe what the sales team felt was super critical or not, or whether it was something that multiple customers were going to care about or not. And so I was tasked with coming in and establishing the practice of product management and building up a team here, which I actually expected a little bit more resistance from the development team than I ended up receiving. I think they liked me being the buffer in between them and the sales team. But they also really loved that product management was always looking for the why, engaging with customers directly, trying to understand not just I want this feature or the product to do this thing, but really understanding the why. And to Nick's point, uncovering maybe you don't actually need what you think you need. Maybe you want to do something a little bit different that would solve your problem in a different way. And I wasn't really well equipped with some of those methodologies and really getting to the heart of the customer why and having those detailed conversations. And so I looked to different resources and speaking to my network about different tools and frameworks to kind of really extract that, rather than the sort of mindset that we had. The other thing I've encountered in a lot of organizations being in a product role is really that you have to shift to that customer mindset. A lot of times in a technology organization specifically, you think you've built the best mousetrap, right? Our technology is better than anybody else's, but the why or the customer understanding of like, do they actually care about this amazing feature that you hold near and dear? Again, having those great conversations and really understanding how to frame up the customer needs in a different way is something that I've kind of stumbled around and learned on my own. And I know the students in the MDPM program now have been given resources to actually properly, build out those needs and requirements in a better way. So that's a gap I see at a lot of organizations, and something that's really useful in learning proper product methodologies.
And Rebecca, you also your current work position is very much user focused around user experience. Same question for you. How did your background in computer engineering prepare you for this? What kind of gaps were there and things that you had to kind of learn on your own on the job?
I think for me, it was a different perspective. It was more that I feel like when I was in this school, we were told to like pay attention to details, to make your lab perfect, to make your code perfect, because you're getting a grade of the code that you're about to submit. So you want to make it as fast as possible, the algorithm as perfect as possible, runtime, the best runtime ever. But when we're making product, like a lot of times I feel like development especially tend to like get lost in the details, but sometimes you just gotta like back off a little and then look at like the holistic view of the entire product and to reflect, how do we make this? We don't really need to make the product perfect in the first launch. We can make it like iteratively just through agile practices or anything like that, so that it's not we're not pushing to perfection as always. So I think that was the gap, I think, from professional workplace and just from academic experiences. Yeah.
And even just the change of the focus on the code above all else to the focus of the user experience, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And a bit more about the challenges you face in changing career direction. Sometimes in an organization, you're known in a particular role, and if you're trying to push to a different role, maybe it's difficult to get people to see you differently or accept you in that new role. How did that go for you? Did you have to move organization to get people to start seeing you differently, or was it more natural? I don't know, Nick, do you want to start us with that?
Sure. Well, in the startup world, switching roles isn't as difficult because there's just never enough people to do the work. And so it's like if somebody's willing to raise their hand to sort of fill a gap, so to speak, everybody's like, great, you go ahead and you take this on top of everything else that you're doing, right? So shifting roles, generally, I didn't have too many challenges making those moves. However, I would say that one of the challenges that I definitely felt when making this career switch is, as a developer and engineer, you're so focused on the how, and it's like, what is the shortest path to be able to satisfy a requirement? And one of the things that kept falling early in my sort of roles in this sort of product management role, I found that a lot of the times, because I was technical, I often started to have the how influence the why. So it's like I would start to think about, instead of coming up with a solution that best solves the problem, this is the fastest thing that gets us mostly there. And so that influence can sometimes be useful if you're in a startup and you got to just move very quickly, but often it has a long-term detriment because you're not thinking purely about the problem and trying to solve it at the root. You're almost trying to create like a patch band-aid solution that kind of gets you like some sort of net result, but may not be the best solution ever. And that's something that took me quite some time to overcome. In fact, I still have some of those issues now, which is, one of the reasons why we're actually hiring a head of product within our company to help kind of specifically split that off to have two different roles. But that's something that I think anybody from a technical perspective has to really, if they are going to make that transition, is to kind of wear that hat and focus on the why first before starting to get into that solutions mode.
And Jessica, in contrast to Nick, you've worked in some very big corporations like BlackBerry and now Cineplex. How did that work out for you as you were kind of changing the way you wanted to be viewed in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's organization dependent. I find product management at certain organizations tends to be very business focused, and the folks who play those roles come from, the business world. And so for me, it was a natural transition because I had the technology background. I had credibility with the tech team too. So I could talk the business talk, but then the technology team understood that I had some cred in that space, which is incredibly helpful because you're sometimes, as a product manager, you're making important decisions. I'll give a little story example here. As we built an AI platform called Smart Engine, and the tech team, as we were sort of coming up with how we were going to design it, said, hey, we can do this algorithmically or we can do it with machine learning. And I was like, oh hell yeah, if we can do it with machine learning, let's go down that path. And they didn't need to explain more to me because I had the basic computer science fundamental understanding. I'll tell you, my coding skills are not very strong anymore. It's been a long time since I did any coding, but I can at least understand some of those fundamental practices, and so that gives me a sense of credibility with the team that I think built my relationship with them a lot faster when I came into this organization than it would have perhaps if someone was purely sort of business minded. So for all of you technical folks, it is really great to have that background for all the reasons that you might imagine.
Maybe I'd like to follow up on that question because we've talked about already what are some of the blind spots coming from a technical background, some of the needs to shift how you think about the product that's being developed. But I think you're raising the very interesting point that there's a lot of advantages as well of coming from a technical background. Maybe Rebecca, should we shift to you? Did you find any particular advantages that you brought coming from computer engineering rather than coming from a business background?
I think it's definitely the trust from the development team, because I know developers tend to get like skeptical, be like, do you even know what I'm talking about? Because a lot, like they definitely, it's hard to explain logics or concepts to someone with zero knowledge. So I think when I'm approaching them, they know I do have some sort of background in that. So they kind of not respect, but like they will be more patient if I would have more questions, like as a follow-up. And I think it's easier to even just to establish the relationship between business and the technical team. I think usually we have heard a lot of things about like how PM and developers, they're usually in a very like, the tension is high because what PM wants sometimes not what the developers are building, where they have like conflicts of interest there. But it's easier for me to sort of establish the alignment since I do understand what they're saying, and I can probably help because their pain points are pain points too. So definitely it was the mutual understanding. Yeah.
And Nick, anything to add to that?
No, I
What
completely
advantages came from a computer science background?
I 100% agree with Rebecca. I think she hit the nail on the head there. I think there's a matter of like developers work a lot or much more agreeable to work with folks that they feel that they can respect from a language and knowledge perspective. You know, I hate to say this, but you know, especially you got a lot of developers that if they have to explain basic concepts to you, they just basically dismiss anything you say to them because they just think that you know, you don't even know the basics here. How can I possibly be taking sort of requirements and sort of direction from you? And so there's an element of that, and as much as I wish it wasn't there, it does exist quite a lot in the industry. And so being able to speak to them, not only that level, but to be able to enhance and facilitate that, to help them understand that, and that you're not really there to give them directions, but to take the stuff that they're doing, helping guide that with a sense of sort of business strategy, because that's one thing they don't think a lot about. And so if there's like a mutual respect, that actually just allows everything to work so much more smoothly. And that also, that same sort of like, you know, acumen you bring from a technology perspective, as you start building out your business acumen, will also work the other way when you start dealing with sort of the business stakeholders and stuff like that, and helping them understand why a project is going to take, you know, 2 times longer than they originally estimated and stuff like that. You know, as a product manager, your number one skill is being that facilitator and making sure everybody's comfortable all along the way.
I love it. And I mean, that certainly all resonates with my experience kind of on both sides of the technical and product side in projects I've worked on too. I'd just like to call out as well, if any of you who are in the audience would like to pose questions to the panel, either to the panel in general or to a specific person on the panel, please go ahead and pull up that Q&A tab and type in a question for us, and we'll answer them as they come in. So in general about product management, I mean, we talked in my initial slides a little bit about what product management involves, but what are your thoughts about this part of the role of a product manager? And I think Nick just touched on this a moment ago, of bridging together different parts of the organization, such as developers, management, designers, marketers. What are the challenges involved with this, and how do you navigate those challenges? Because that's, again, from a computer science background, that's not really something we're asked to do very much. And maybe Jessica, would you like to kick us off with that?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've learned along the way is that product management is a lot about influence and storytelling. You need to, all of your stakeholders in any of those business groups that you listed off, you know, need to have an understanding of the direction you're going and what the vision is for the product. And some may not like it, some might like it, and some might be bought in, and you're influencing them along the way. You know, sometimes as a product manager, you're you know, I think Nick touched on this, you're telling the business folks, look, this is going to take longer than you know, you want. This is why, and you have to influence in that direction. And then on the other side, sometimes it's, hey, development team, you know, our timeline for this roadmap needs to be a lot more compressed for these reasons. And you need to be able to tell that story. So I think, you know, that common thread along between the different groups, you know, really needs to be around sort of storytelling and painting that vision in order to influence the teams to move in the direction that you're trying to go. You know, I have a story even from a previous organization where I was an idea came into me, an initial concept from a very senior leader in the organization, and I had to go back and let them know that their idea was going to lose us money and that we shouldn't do it. And let me tell you, that's not always an easy conversation to have with an executive. But again, it was about being prepared with numbers, being prepared with, some rough insight from the development team on costs, et cetera, to be able to go back and paint a picture to say, great idea, but these are the things you're going to run into. So doing that in all areas of the organization is important, and not always easy for those of us who are not, used to working with different teams.
And I think, part of the point there is that, so you and Nick are senior in your organizations, but product managers aren't necessarily that senior.
Yeah, that's right.
And so are often having to bring people together, even though they don't have
a big title,
kind of org chart control over their activities.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I find what sorry for speaking out of turn here. What I find often really helps, especially if you're in an environment where you're not necessarily like the like a senior stakeholder that has that kind of control. And I had this early in my career, is to really look at sort of like what are the languages or sort of frameworks and tool sets that each of these different departments follow. So it's like, project managers are all about their Gantt charts and their story points and all that kind of stuff. You got your designers, which are very focused on the design systems and everything else. And it's always trying to figure out how do you speak to them in their own language so that they can understand how this all comes together. And that's part of the influence side of which is the best way to be able to really get through to them. You have to speak to them in their own language. And a lot of that comes from just the experience of working in multidisciplinary team and sees how each of these different departments kind of see value and progress, and being able to relate it back to the way that they tend to see their progress within their department.
And Rebecca, do you have thoughts on this question as well?
I totally agree with Nick there. I think you just have to have the eyes of different teams to be able to understand and be able to communicate. There's no way you can communicate to a business person by telling them, oh, this backhand is not going to work, or like it's going to cost us a lot. Like it just doesn't work. So same way with the development team, sometimes you just have to translate the language.
And again, this is another example then of where coming from a technical background is helpful if you speak the language of the development team, and are able to kind of engage in the discussion and possibly push back on some assumptions that are being made, which can be much more difficult for people who come from a purely business background. Yeah. Now we have our first question for the audience. So let me put this out to the panel. So as tech undergoes a correction and Canada enters a potential recession, where do you see product management moving as we continue to see cuts in large technology companies? So who'd like to jump off with that one?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, I think product management practitioners, folks who are good at product management, become a good testing point for what you should and shouldn't do as an organization. And I think that's incredibly important. So if organizations are looking to cut back or streamline their product portfolios and what have you, the product managers who can evaluate and understand how to trim back what you're doing are the ones that are really successful and will have a long-term role in an organization. So being able to look at all of the different inputs and different parameters of the choice of doing something or not doing something in an organization, that's a valuable skill set and role to play. So I just as a senior leader in my current organization, the best product managers are the ones that will be able to be nimble and bring value in different ways.
And from a startup and small company perspective, I can definitely see there's a lot of movement towards hiring engineers in more of a global workforce space. With COVID and how it's changed sort of like the work environment, there's so many small companies which are completely distributed. Like FlipGive is no different. We have a lot of our folks which are, we have a half of our team which is here in Toronto and various parts of Canada, but we also have a lot of folks which are overseas, and because the competition for engineering resources now is a global game, and unfortunately, one of the challenges because of the cost of living, you have engineers which are in other parts of the country which can demand a much lower salary, and startups are always looking to lower sort of their overhead costs and stuff like that. So, if anything, what this actually does is it actually creates even a larger demand for really good product managers, because a really good product manager, especially in this day and age, needs to be able to work with a distributed team of engineers that have not just technical language but also language challenges. So it's sometimes I've actually had run into cultural conversations where certain words mean something different, and I've had to manage that, and that's something new I've never had to deal with before. So I would actually say the demand for good product managers is not going to get hit as hard as it will be for engineers, at least in the small startup space, because the need for proper requirements management and making sure that projects are delivered on time and et cetera is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, so because I just went through this whole job hunting thing last term, I think it was 4 months ago, and then a lot of my friends who just graduated from Waterloo, if you really think about it, Waterloo graduate computer engineering, you should be able to find a job. At this term, it was pretty hard. And when we look at all of the large companies, when we're talking about Google, Amazon, or other big five, like Fane or anything like that, they cut down layers. So I think there's been a sign where companies create too many layers and actually causes inefficiencies instead of efficiencies. And they realize that. Actually, these companies realized these problems before COVID. I mean, before their money problem, but they had the money to burn. But now they don't anymore, so they have to cut people. So for large companies, I think if you really look at product management, if you are a good PM, you should have nothing to worry about unless you're in more of an innovation team, because I know big companies are trying to cut down their innovation programs because of the budget problem. So I think the key here for me was more from just, if you work on the core product and then you understand the product, I think it shouldn't be that much of a problem. But yeah.
I'm going to pick up on our next audience question. So Kelly says, you've spoken to blind spots, which is very helpful. How important is a background in full stack development to success or credibility versus someone only front-end development, back-end development, or even someone with only academic experience? Does it all come down to credibility and communication?
I can try to take a stab at that one. So for me, even though I was a full stack developer, I was actually much stronger on the front end side. So I wouldn't say that I was a very strong back end developer starting off in my career. I think the key here is that you need to be able to understand enough to be able to have to understand sort of the impact, but you don't need to necessarily be able to code those specific things. So there's always going to be technical architects or lead developers that will basically assist you with that, and that's part of the actual influence and collaboration aspect, where one of the most important things as a product manager is knowing where your knowledge stops and who you need to speak to help you fill the rest of the gaps along the way, so that you can make a proper decision on behalf of the rest of the organization. So there's many times, and even still now, even as a senior person, we'll delve into an area that I don't understand the technology well enough, and I'll find people that can help me understand it. So, you don't necessarily need to have, life is a learning experience, and every single project I do brings something to the table. And, as you continue to get better and better, you will find that you will rely on others less. But in the early days, find mentors, find other people within your organization that can help you, find colleagues. A lot of that is through conversation that you'll be able to truly understand sort of what the problem space is and how to solve it.
I'm just going to double down on what Nick said there, in that product management knowledge set is very wide and nobody, even the best product managers, don't have expertise in every part of that role. So stick with what you're good at and what you know about, and find others to help fill those other areas. So whether it's you don't have a strong understanding in the financials part in modeling, and you go to someone on your financial team and you're like, help me figure this out. Or you know, if you're stronger in back end development than front end development, there's always someone who can generally help you kind of get that depth that you need. And I would say you're not necessarily expected to have a very deep knowledge of that wide spectrum. And I think, you know, you find tools and people to help along the way. So don't be scared by not having a certain level of depth in a particular area. There's always ways to learn.
It's more strategic thinking around the technology, the big choices, like the example you gave of are we going to hard code this AI, or are we going to use machine learning? And being able to have a sensible discussion about that is important.
Yeah, around the fundamentals.
I'm going to skip, as an educator myself, I'm going to skip over to Alaa's question, which is, how do you see product manager in the education industry? Do universities and colleges realize this need and that they need product managers? And I think we have the good fortune that we've actually got two people who have background in the education industry, both Rebecca and Jessica. Rebecca, do you want to take this one first?
Like education industry as in like D2L or?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, when I was working there as a software developer, I was more working on the actual like platform of Brightspace, they call it. I think I didn't really interact with their PM, but I feel like at that time the PM was actually responsible for multiple products inside of Brightspace, and I could see like there are a lot of communications between different universities, different backgrounds, because they do I think K to 12, and then for university, and then there are the ones for professional workspaces. So when we're developing the product, we had to think about how does this benefit all three kind of areas. We're at least hitting 2 out of the 3 to make this product beneficial or even profitable. So as I think the PM at D2L was more of just standing in the educator's shoes to understand their pain points and to understand the needs. But then when we think about it, their end users also include students. I think one flaw we had there was that their student feedback are coming from the teacher as well. They never really actually interview the students, be like, how do you like Brightspace? They collected these feedback from the teacher. Then I think that was there was definitely like a gap between them. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say in general, especially when universities and higher education places are evaluating different tool sets that their organizations are going to use, there are so many different tool sets that I think that those organizations have not typically had to manage. It tends to be sort of an area that has been a lot more traditional, at least when I had the experience. I didn't realize you had worked at D2L as well, Rebecca. But my learning there was really just in helping those organizations understand what they really need. I think big software companies sometimes just talk and tell them they need all these wonderful gadgets and things that are a lot of times overkill, and they only use about 10% of the features and functionality. So having those profiles within higher education to really evaluate their student and educators' needs, and in turn either choose platforms or build bridges between different disparate systems to really enhance the learning experience is super important. And it's not something that I don't think education is alone in this. I think it's also in some of those more traditional industries like banking and things too. You see it in a lot of different larger sort of more traditional industries.
And I can certainly say within the universities themselves, there is always an information technology services group, and they have product managers who are responsible for the various ed tech products that the university deploys and uses, and they would report to the CTO. So I think that battle seems to have been won. We have another question. We're seeing the consolidation of CPO roles into the CTO role in major companies now. How do you see this affecting the careers of product people, and what signs should we be reading from companies that do this?
That's interesting.
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
No, please. You go first.
I was just going to say, I actually think it's good for product folks. I think that the expectation and the reason those things are collapsing is that they're actually becoming much more product focused technology folks, much more customer focused technology folks. I've worked at a number of organizations, like I mentioned previously, that build cool tech for the sake of building cool tech. And I think if you don't have a leader who really understands the why, even in the technical roles, you can sometimes fall in the trap of building, a better mousetrap. So I actually read that, and from my conversations just in my own network, I actually see that as a very positive thing for product minded technology folks, not the other way around, even though the title might be CTO. And I'll pass it off to Nick because that's his title. But from my network, I see it much more as a positive for product folks.
Yeah, I actually echo Jessica's sentiments quite greatly. Like, as a product-oriented CTO, because like I've actually, like, when people ask me, like, what kind of CTO are you? I actually tell them I'm very product-focused. However, I think at least in the smaller companies, typically you don't have a CPO in a lot of startups and like early stage companies and stuff like that. You will have only a CTO because it's like, once again, like when you have to minimize staff, you pick what you absolutely need to have, right? And actually a product-minded CTO is actually, to Jess's point, somebody that's much more valuable, because they're not just picking, it's not like you're just picking technology for technology's sake. You're focusing on what it is that the experience needs to have, and trying to figure out the best sort of frameworks, libraries, technology stacks to be able to solve that problem. And so typically within smaller companies, you have somebody like a director of product or a head of product type of role, which it was kind of like the equivalent of a CPO within a larger company. And so the distinctions there typically are that the CTO, if they are responsible for the product side as well, they're more, it's almost like a dual, like a role where they work together, where the head of product is focusing a lot on the research side that I mentioned earlier, the validation, working on the growth experiments, and the CTO is focused more on the technology stack that's going to be able to empower those measurements, be able to allow the team to move quickly. So one is more like infrastructure and the other one's more execution. So that's kind of the division of labor, and depending on each company, there's always going to be sort of like a slightly different view of how that relationship works between the head of product and that CTO role. But overall, I definitely think that it is a good thing that people are starting to recognize the value of that, and that there is sort of like a path to that sort of C-suite role that even product managers that can come through can still take on in their career path.
Well, I learned something there, so thank you for those answers. I'm just going to ask one final question of Rebecca before I turn back to Connor. So, Rebecca, as part of your journey to moving into a more product role, you're enrolled currently in our Master of Digital Product Management at Queen's University. Could you comment on what you found helpful in moving forward in your product management direction from being enrolled in this program, and any new perspectives you've obtained along the way? I gotta say, she's not been prepped for this question.
I wasn't, but for me, it was the finding out why instead of focusing on the how, which was how I was trained for the last 5 years. I think we learned about like digital product opportunity, digital value, and I think now I start to like look at everything from a value perspective, like what kind of value does this product bring to the users? And it's oftentimes that I realize, hey, like it's actually sometimes we're just building it for the sake of building it. So my current project involves building a product for a startup car rental company. And when we're building it, sometimes we realize we're building features not for the users, but for ride-alike, or for it doesn't, these features don't really benefit the users. It's just a feature we thought we would need, but after talking to the users or talking to car owners, car renters, and realize like they don't bring any value. And it's hard to say no to features, especially it sounded really cool, like it leverages emerging technologies, it leverages AI. Because I know whenever people mention AI, machine learning, it's like, oh, big word, like it's big technology. We definitely want to use it. But sometimes simple solution like helps people more than a cool solution. So that is something I learned.
I love it. Thank you. I think I'm going to leave it there for the panel, but thanks so much. I've found this just so interesting hearing your perspectives, and particularly we have 3 very different perspectives, yet there was so much commonality between what you had to say. So thank you very much from me. And over to you, Connor.
Yeah, so just want to repeat Nick there, thanking our panelists, Jessica, Rebecca, and Nick Lee for taking time out of their busy work days to participate in the panel discussion. Thanks obviously to Nick Graham for leading and moderating the chat today. I thought it was a very interesting one. I certainly learned a lot as well, just sitting here in the boardroom in Kingston with Val. And last but not least, we certainly want to thank all the participants, especially those of you who hung on to the very end of the conversation today. In closing, just a quick reminder that we do have our next general information session webinar that's scheduled for next month, Monday, February 5th, specifically over the lunch hour. So if this dialogue today has piqued your interest and now you'd like to learn more about the MDPM program, please do register for that information session webinar next month. It should be a great opportunity to do so. So thanks again to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we hope to be in touch again soon.